Hello everyone, my name is Marla and welcome to my very first video. So I'm actually going to be doing something that I have been asked many times about how I do this. I'm going to be making sauerkraut. So sauerkraut is such a beneficial food, and not only is it delicious, but it's very good for you. It helps with your stomach. It has lots of probiotics as well as many vitamins and minerals. But the hard part that a lot of people come to is the fermentation process. So whenever they're doing it, most of the time something happens and it molds on them. Well, I'm actually going to bring you step by step on how I actually create my sauerkraut. The only difference is I do not use mason jars. I will actually create a video on how to make sauerkraut in mason jars for you, for if you want to make sauerkraut at home, but you do not have a crock. So what I mean by a crock is I'm going to go ahead and flip you around real fast so that you can see what I mean. So these are sauerkraut crocks. A sauerkraut crock is actually made primarily for making fermented foods such as sauerkraut or kimchi or anything like that. What happens is you put everything into the crock itself, and when it ferments, it actually releases the gas, but no oxygen can actually get inside. So what you actually end up doing is with your crocks, you'll actually fill this area with water, and when you put your lid on, you have little hinges on your lids so where oxygen can release, or the carbon dioxide can release out of the fermentation, but no oxygen can get replaced into the jar because of the water that you actually have in that line. I have two crocks that we are going to be filling today. One is a 5-gallon, which is 10 liters, and then a half-gallon, which is roughly 5 liters. I think, no, 0.2 liters. We're going to be filling them with, of course, our cabbage. So you can see here I have 8 heads of cabbage. This will not be enough. I actually have 3 more heads of cabbage in my refrigerator that we are going to be adding to this process, but we're going to start off with the 6 heads first. The purple cabbage is going to go into the mini crock, and the green cabbage is going to go into the big crock. Okay, so for this part of the process, of course, what we're going to do is we're going to take our cabbage, and all of them have been pre-washed. So all I have to do is peel them back, and you'll actually peel back the first top layers of the leaves, but keep them because we'll actually need them for pushing down all of the chopped cabbage. This way nothing floats to the top, and they'll go underneath the weights. You'll need salt. So I actually have here kosher salt. You can use any kind of salt that you prefer, whether it's pickling salt or pink salt or lava salt, but you do have to keep in mind that if you're going to use any salt other than kosher and pickling, your sauerkraut is going to become very cloudy and will take on a weird color. So I prefer using kosher salt. It helps with the breakdown a lot better, as well as pickling salt. Pickling salt does the same thing, and they are actually really nice coarse grains. So if you want to use any kind of salt, I would recommend either pickling or kosher, and I use Morton's. We will need caraway seeds. So this may not be enough for how much we are going to be making, at least in the 5-gallon crock. So that's the one we're actually going to be doing first. I'm going to be needing caraway seeds and what I like to call eye of newt. So eye of newt is actually just mustard seed. Mustard seed is actually wonderful. It gives a great tang to your sauerkraut and will bring out a lot of the flavor notes of your caraway seeds. The other thing that I like to use as well is juniper berries. So juniper berries are a wonderful earthy flavor as well as piney in the sense. If you like the flavor of juniper berries, I highly recommend putting them into your sauerkraut. We are actually going to be adding these to the purple sauerkraut, not the green sauerkraut. So another thing that people have asked me before is what's the difference between green, purple, and pink sauerkrauts. A lot of people think that your pink and your purple sauerkrauts have been dyed, and that's not true. Green sauerkraut or white sauerkraut, whichever color you think it looks like in the jar, actually just comes from green cabbage. And pink sauerkraut is a blend of purple cabbage and green cabbage. And purple sauerkraut is, of course, from purple cabbage. All right, so what I'm doing right now is I am peeling off those outer leaves, taking off all the super loose ones. We don't need them. And usually the super loose ones are going to be the ones that are a little bit tougher. Take those and place them off to the side because you will be needing them again. While you are getting ready to be cutting up your cabbage, I highly recommend doing the brine that you're going to need for this. So with your brine, depending on how much cabbage you are making, depends on how much brine you will need. Since I am doing the big crock, we are actually going to be needing at least 8 cups of brine. So brine is, for sauerkraut, is just water and salt. And you'll need, it's 1 tablespoon of salt per 1 cup of water. So since I have 8 cups of water, I'm going to need 8 cups or 8 tablespoons of salt. This way you can make that, set it off to the side, and it can start dissolving. All right, so with sauerkraut, you don't actually have to remove the cores. You are more than welcome to if you like, but I actually like to leave them in there. I found that it has become a wonderful treat, and it's basically a sauerkraut pickle in the sense, and it's delicious and amazing, and it's fun to snack on. So we're actually going to take our cabbage, cut it in half, then again cut it in fourths so that it's easy to cut, and then cut out the core. The core we actually want to just go ahead, throw into our bowl. And what we're doing is when we cut it into quarters, that's the layering that we're going to be doing for the bruising of the cabbage. Go ahead and cut this one. Whenever you're cutting your cabbage, you actually want to make sure that it is fairly thinly cut. It's going to be very tedious, but well worth it in the end. So I'm going to start with this side. Now, if you're one of those lucky people out there and you can get your hands on a kraut shredder or shredder, I highly recommend getting yourself one because this can be very tedious and very painful on the hands. All right, so after we get our first quarter done, I'm going to throw it into the bowl and kind of break it up a little bit. Throw that all in there. We're going to take a pinch of salt. Put that over the top. Small pinch of mustard seed, throw that in. Small pinch of caraway, throw that in. And then we're going to bruise it. So most people, and I typically would do this with a mallet, but unfortunately I do not have one that's big enough to reach inside the crock. That's why we're doing this into a side bowl. And all you're going to do is squeeze and kind of pull, almost basically take your anger out on it. Be perfect, and this actually is a great stress reliever. So we'll just go ahead and leave that in, and then we're going to cut our next quarter and layer that on top and then bruise it with everything again. So of course, cut out the core, throw that on in, and then cut into little shreds. When you're doing this, you do want to make sure that you are being very aware of where your knife is and where your fingers are, because you don't want to cut your fingers. And again, The smaller you can get it, the better. If you can't get it that small, don't worry about it. Unless you are actually using a mason jar, then you do want to try and get those shreds as small as you can. And into the bowl, break it up a little bit. And again, pinch of salt, a little pinch of eye of newt, and pinch of caraway. Then bruise it again. The bruising is actually very key in this. If you don't bruise the sauerkraut well enough, it's not going to ferment quick enough. So what you're doing is we're actually releasing the juices and the natural water out of the cabbage leaves so that when they ferment, it actually starts to give off that sour tone and all the good bacteria. Now, if you get some loose leaves that come off of your already split cabbage, that's perfectly fine. The best thing to do is actually take it and roll it up and slice it on up. Throw that on in. Sorry for all the banging. You're basically just going to repeat the process until your bowl is full. Now, when you're doing this, I do recommend wearing gloves if you're going to do it this way. Mostly because if you're using kosher salt, it's very sharp. It can actually cut your hands up. So we don't want that to happen. All right. So that's what I have for this right now. I'm actually going to take you over to the crock, and we're going to go ahead and place this into the crock. And then I'm going to continue on with cutting up all 8 heads of cabbage. Well, I'm going to do, all 8 heads of cabbage that are green for the big crock. And then I will show you the aftermath of the process. Okay, so I'm actually going to place our sauerkraut into the big crock. And when you're doing so, just got to be careful that you don't make a huge old mess. So very gently throw it on in there. And as you can see from that, it doesn't seem like it's filling up very much because it's not. This big crock can actually hold 8 heads by itself without any issues. So once we have our sauerkraut in there, and this is actually going to be one of those with every process, it's going to be the same thing over and over and over again. So chopping the cabbage, salting, caraway seeds, mustard seed, bruising the cabbage, and then placing it into the crock. So once it's in the crock, you just need to make sure that you completely flatten it out in every single layer. So go in there, flatten it. And once it's flattened, just so we don't have too much oxygen that gets in there, we're going to take the lid and we're actually going to close the lid. Do not put water in there, just close the lid. This way no debris or anything while you're doing all of your other chopping will get in there. So in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and let you go, and I'll meet you at the end when everything is completely packed. All right, guys, so this is actually the full crock. What we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and give it one final pat down. So you want to try and get it as packed in there as possible. This is when a mallet comes in use. All right, so here's the above notice on it. So with this, if you're using a crock, if you have a crock, the highest that you want to fill it is to the little handles that are on the sides. This way you have enough space to put the weights in. I'm going to go ahead and give it one more press down. Like I said, if you have a mallet, this is the best time to use it. I don't have a mallet that would actually fit into this crock because of how big it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my fist and I'm going to push it down as hard as I can. I actually got myself a stool so I can get a little higher up. And I'm just going to try and beat it down as hard as I can, pushing it everything and basically packing it. All right. So after it's been packed, we're actually going to get some of those leaves that we put off to the side. And you want to use the biggest leaves that you can. So the biggest ones that we have are here. And you're going to place them inside your crock. This one has a little bit of damage on it, so we're going to take that off so it doesn't contaminate the sauerkraut. Just kind of push that all down, making sure all of the loose shredded kraut pieces are covered. There you go. And then from there, we're going to take our weights and place them inside. I'm going to try and spread them out to the sides and push down. And from here, this is where we're going to need our brine. So like I said, our brine is water and salt. If you want your brine to be anything other than that, so if you want to make a sauerkraut or something that is a little bit more out of the box when it comes to fermentation, you can actually do anything. So if you want to add chilies into it, if you wanted to add garlic, you can. Basically anything, it's up to your imagination. Just kind of fixing the leaves in there to make sure our little kraut pieces wouldn't fly up. But if you're going to do anything other than just salt and water, make sure you try it first before you put it into your fermentation. So from here, we're going to go ahead and pour it right on in. Giving it a little bit of time to settle into the bottom. Because we do have it really super packed in there, so we want to make sure that we're going to have enough water. So when you're making sauerkraut, you do want to make sure that your brine covers everything, at least to the top of the weights, if not higher. So from what it looks like our weights and everything is under the water. So we'll go ahead and give it another push down. And you want everything to be submerged in the water and into the brine so that it doesn't mold. If you have anything sitting outside of the brine, that will actually end up molding and will contaminate the entire project. And you don't want to do that. But as you can see, we do have a couple little floaties every once in a while, which is okay. In a week, we are going to go ahead and check this to see how everything is doing. So in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and wipe the reservoir because I did get some debris in there. You want to wipe it clean so that there is a good seal between the lid, the water, and the bottom of the crock. All right, there's that. You're going to take your lid, place it in, and if you have a hard water system, you do want to use OR water or purified water in your lid. Just fill that up. All right. So we have our water into our lid, gonna have a nice seal on it. From here, you'll move your crock or whatever you're using into an area where it's gonna stay fairly room temperature warm, but not too cold and not too hot. If it gets too hot, it will be fine, but you'll just have to check your kraut more often. If it is cool, you don't have to check it as often. So my house fairly stays around 60 degrees on a normal everyday basis. So my kraut will actually be ready and completely ready in about 3 weeks from this point. If it was during the summertime, it'd be more like 2 weeks. So in 1 week, we'll actually check to see where our kraut is sitting in its fermentation process and to make sure that nothing has started to spoil and nothing is molding. When you ferment, there will be a bubbling action in the sense, so it's almost like a scum. That is perfectly fine. You want that. What you don't want is mold. Mold is actually going to look white and fuzzy, and it's actually going to almost be like hair-like, whereas scum is going to be bubbly and kind of, well, scummy. So the scum you want, because that's actually the good bacteria is building and causing the fermenting, whereas mold you do not. And if you do get mold, it can ruin the entire crock or the entire kraut in the sense, even just a little bit. So you do want to keep an eye on it. If you are using a sauerkraut crock, make sure there is water in the brim at all times. Depending on the area you live, I live at high altitude, so my water actually gets sucked up under the backside of the lid during certain times of the day and will release it during the low times of the day. So do keep an eye on that. If you do happen to fill it, it's okay. It will not overflow. The water will actually get just sucked up and into the into your pot, which is perfectly fine. That's why I said you want to use purified water, OR water, or bottled water if you have hard water. So my hard water, we have a well, so we have a lot of sulfur in our water, which we do not want in our crock. So I use OR water. So this is done, and since this is done, I'm actually going to show you how to make sauerkraut, since I have a little bit of cabbage extra in a mason jar. So let me go ahead and move this real fast, and I will be back. All right, guys, so we're now turning to mason jars. So if you are actually somebody who does not have a sauerkraut crock, which is perfectly fine, you do not need one. You will actually use a mason jar. You would need a wide mouth. Wide mouths are the best because you can get everything in there, and I would highly recommend pickling stones. So pickle stone will actually be the perfect weight, and it fits only in a wide mouth jar. If you do not have pickling stones, that is perfectly fine. You don't need a pickling stone. I just recommend them. What you would do is you would get a Ziploc bag and either put water into the Ziploc bag so that you can force it in, or if you have marbles, marbles work as well. So we're going to go ahead, and your cabbage is in the same process that you would for the crock. Salt, mustard seed, and caraway seed. If you want, you can add juniper, which I actually am going to add to this package, or this kraut thing. So you take your mason jar and go ahead and stuff it. And in between, making basically layers. So of course you're going to push it down again. Kind of stuff it in there as hard as you can. The less amount of area for oxygen to be, the better. We're going to use just a couple. I actually have, 1, 2, 3, I probably say about 7 juniper berries. You don't want too many, especially in a small container like this, because if juniper can be very, very overpowering. All right, then you're going to go ahead and re-stuff some more. And as you can see, we're kind of full, so we want to make sure that we push this down as much as possible. Pushing down will also help kind of force the cabbage to stay down when you put the brine in. Got that in there. And as you can see, there's already some kind of moisture in there. That's actually good. That means that your cabbage is starting to basically bruise, and it's releasing its own juices, and that's what you want. You want all that juice from the cabbage outside of the brine. So go ahead and push that down as hard as you can. Then clear it away. And you'll take your pickling stone or Ziploc bag, whatever you have, and place it right on top, pushing down again. And then from there, I'm going to take my glove off so I can do this much better. Saltwater brine. Again, for every 1 cup of water, you need a tablespoon of salt. And you're going to pour this right over the top, giving it time to get down into the base. There's lots of air bubbles coming out, so that's actually a good sign. That means all of the oxygen is being released out of the bottom. You can tap it on the base if you need to, get a little extra moisture out. And of course, we're going to make sure that our stone is completely covered. If you need to, go ahead and push down to help release any extra oxygen that there might be in there. And of course, it goes without saying, whenever you're doing this, you do want to make sure you have clean hands. Of course, mine have been in gloves, but I had washed them before. So it looks like all of our air is out. All of our brine has settled. And what you'll do is you'll just take the lid of a mason jar, not the screw part, just the lid, and leave it loose over the top. It just basically, you want it to be where oxygen can release out of it, but nothing can get really sucked into it. This one will actually go ahead and check within a week as well. But since it is in a mason jar, it's going to be so much easier to actually pay attention to it. I'm going to go ahead and close this real fast so I can turn it on its side for you. But you can actually, you'll watch and you'll see, like, right now there's even like some bubbles in there, which is okay. That's actually a good sign. and it should continue to bubble. So in a week, I'm going to just go ahead and place this in my pantry on a plate. This way, if anything overflows, it's perfectly fine. If you need to, you can either keep the brine that you made if you made too much, or you can make new brine if you need it. If you see that the water level is starting to lower, refill it, add more water to it. You need to make sure that the brine is always on top of your sauerkraut. All right, so from here, I'm actually going to show you another technique using the crock with our purple cabbage. All right, everybody, and last but not least, I'm going to go ahead and do sauerkraut using my little crock. So because this one is smaller, I can actually reach inside. What I actually use is a wooden spoon. So typically you would need to actually use a wooden mallet, but I don't have one of those, so I use a wooden spoon instead. This one is really easy. You just take your sauerkraut, or not even your sauerkraut, your purple cabbage. You don't actually have to do the salt and everything into it after you cut it, because you're going to do it all right into the crock. So you just take your cabbage and you're going to place it into the crock in layers. So put it in. And with each layer, you're actually going to sprinkle some salt into it, some caraway, mustard seed, or eye of newt, as it's funnily called. And since this one, I'm actually going to use juniper. So with each layer, you actually only want to do maybe 1 to 2 juniper berries, or it can get really piney. And then you just take it and beat it down. A mallet does work best because it does have more surface area, but the wooden spoon does work as well, because you are breaking that all up. And then just continue on in all of your layers. Salt, mustard seed, caraway, and 2 junipers. And beat it down. And as you're beating down, you want to go ahead and try and push it down as well, so you can fit more in. With the little crock, you can fit just about a head of cabbage, depending on how heavy the cabbage is. So if it's a really tight cabbage, you can do just 1 head. If it's a loose cabbage, you can almost get a head and a half. So, mustard, caraway, and salt, and 2 juniper. Then crush it down again. Now this one, we don't need the extra leaves. We just need to make sure that everything is packed as far as we can, because the weights actually will fit the entire thing completely. So after you pack it all down, take your weights, place them in, and push down, and add your brine. And again, your brine needs to cover completely. If it doesn't, go ahead and get some more. Salt. Mix it all up. And if your salt doesn't completely dissolve into your water, that's perfectly fine. Just make sure the salt gets into your crock. All right, that's done. Take your lid, Make sure everything is wiped out of the reservoir. So we have a nice good seal. Place your lid. Fill with water. And you're done. All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed my sauerkraut process. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments below. Again, I'm really happy to be able to share my process with anybody who's wanting it. If you have any questions, of course, comments again. If there's anything you would like me to try and ferment, go ahead and let me know. If you would like me to try different types of sauerkraut, let me know. I primarily do your basic traditional German or Bavarian sauerkraut, so everything is just traditionally done. But I am always open to new ideas. One of my favorite is actually a combination between sauerkraut and carrots. It's actually wonderful. I have been keeping an eye out on different ways I can do this, but if you have any recommendations, go ahead and leave them in the comments. Thank you again for tuning in.